Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and I am back today with a card on die cut openings. So today I'm going to be using this Inspired by Stamping stamp set. Or I'm actually going to be using a few, but that first one you see off to the left hand side there is called Sun Ripen Pears. Now I'm going to be stamping this onto a 4" by 5¼ inch watercolor paper panel here. So I'm using my Misty today because I'm going to be using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I don't trust myself with pigment inks, so I like to use my Misty for stamping with them. And I went ahead and placed this pear image right in the center of this cardstock panel, or watercolor paper panel, excuse me. Now I have treated my paper with my embossing bag, which is just going to allow me to heat emboss without having a ton of extra stray little powders. Especially in the winter, I like to use this. I live in a very dry place, very cold. So this just helps me with a lot of my static that I get. So again, I'm using that VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'll go ahead and ink up my stamp and stamp it down. Now I'm going to stamp it a few times just to make sure I get my image very dark, very rich black color, and also I get enough ink on there so it's going to allow my clear embossing powder to stick to it. And that is another reason I am using my Misty as well. Whenever I stamp onto watercolor paper, especially the textured side, almost always I never get a good impression the first time. It might look really well in the video, but if I do a close-up of this, you would see that you get a little bit of the ridges from that watercolor paper affecting that stamped image. So I always go back and stamp it a few times. And then I go ahead and heat emboss just to make sure that I get a really nice lined image. So once I have that all stamped out, like I said before, I added my clear embossing powder, and then I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that right on the image. This is going to create a little well for my watercolor, so I don't have to be so careful. I am not the world's best watercolorist. I'm probably one of the worst actually, but I try. So I'm going to go ahead and heat set this just to allow myself a little bit of leeway with my watercolor. So I went ahead and heat set that, and then I mixed up some watercolors, and this is the Sakura Koi sketch palette. It's kind of like a travel watercolor set, but it has like 36 different colors in it. I mixed up a few different greens, and I'm just quickly coloring in that pear, adding a little bit of shading, and then I'll come back in and actually add a few little dots for some texture later on. But I also went ahead and mixed up a few different greens for the leaves as well, and I'll just very quickly color those in. So I'm still working on my mixing, as you could see up above. If I didn't like it, I just wiped it up and mixed up a new color. These are not terribly expensive watercolors, so I really don't have to worry about waste with these. So once I had those greens mixed up, I went ahead and quickly colored in all of my leaves, and then I'll use some browns to come back in for those stems. Now I went ahead and just colored these in quickly. I didn't add any real shadow here. You could certainly do that, but I focused on the pear and just went ahead and added a few little dots for some texture here and there. Now around my pear, I wanted to add a little bit of a halo of blue just for a nice little effect. So I went ahead and used some blue, mixed it up with some white and a lot of water. And then I went ahead and just added a little halo right around that, making sure to come back in with water, clean water on my brush, and really fade that blue off into the white background. So you can see that's what I'm doing here, and all I have on my brush at this point is clean water, just to really soften up those edges. Once I had that all done, I went ahead and heat set this very well so all of my watercolor was completely dry, because I'm going to go ahead and send this through my die cut machine. Now I am using the die cut set from Inspired by Stamping, and this is the Fancy Label Dies 3. Now this is just a little banner, and I went ahead and put this right along that cardstock base, and I ran it through my die cut machine, and this created a nice little banner opening along the bottom. Now I'm also going to go ahead and lay this right over an A2 top folding note card that I'm going to be using as my card base, and I'm going to go ahead and inlay that die right back into where I had it beforehand. So I'll go ahead and hold that die in place with a little bit of painter's tape. And also, before I run this through my die cutting machine, I want to make sure that my card is open, because I don't want to cut through the back of the card base. So I'll go ahead and make sure that's open, hold that die in place with a little bit of tape, and run this through my die cutting machine. Then when this comes out, I'm going to have an opening that I can see from the front of the card directly through to the inside of the card base. Now if you wanted to, you could pop up this front panel and add even more dimension and a little bit more interest. I wanted to keep everything nice and flat. I'll be sending this through the mail. So what I actually did was I just mounted it straight onto that card front. So I'm just using a little bit of double-sided adhesive here, and I want to make sure that I put strips on both sides of that die cut that I created just so it holds it in place and it doesn't have any like flaps happening. So I went ahead and added a little bit extra adhesive to that to hold it in place. Then I just went ahead and took off the backing paper on all of that adhesive, and then I'll overlay that right onto the front of that card base. Now whenever I did this, I did take my time just because I wanted to make sure that both of those die cuts were nice and lined up and that I didn't have any weird gaps or I let a little bit of that back base peek through. I wanted it very clean looking. So I went ahead and took my time with lining this up. So once I had that all nice and lined up, I went ahead and opened up my card in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment on the inside of the card. But because I've created that die cut opening on the front, I'm going to be able to see through to that sentiment. So I'm using the Big Wonderful sentiment stamp set, and in it has the word wonderful, and that's what I want to show through the opening. So I'm going to go ahead and overlay it right through that opening, pick it up with my MISTI, then I can go ahead and open up my card base, know that it's going to be in the correct position because I was able to line it up directly through that opening that I had created. Now I'm going to be using some chartreuse green ink here to kind of match along with my pear, and then I'll just go ahead and stamp that right down onto that card base a few times. But I wanted this to be a little bit of a surprise card as well. So what I did was I went ahead and put 2A on top of that wonderful, and then right underneath it, sister. Now I'm going to stamp those in kind of a khaki brown ink, but you won't be able to see the 2A and the sister. So all it says on the front is wonderful, but when you open it up, you get that nice little sentiment on the inside. Now to go ahead and add a few little embellishments, I just got out my enamel accents in black tie, and I'm just adding a few little dots here and there. So it's still nice and flat to go through the mail, but it adds a little bit more interest. But that finished off today's card. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and as always, I will leave you with these last few pictures. Information and the supply list, you can head to my blog. That link will be in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!